Dad destroyed my $15,000 smart home. Then I found out why. I should have known something was wrong when I got the third call from the gas company in 2 weeks. The first time they said someone had reported a possible leak at my parents' house. False alarm, they told me, but the safety sensors I had installed just 3 months earlier should have caught it. The second call came when Mom accidentally left the stove on overnight, something that never would have happened if the smart shutoff system was working properly. By the third call, I was starting to suspect this wasn't a coincidence. Let me back up. I'm Sarah Chen, 28 years old, and I work as a software engineer for a tech startup in Portland. My parents, Janet and Robert Martinez, live in the same small Oregon town where I grew up, about 3 hours south of where I am now. Dad worked at the lumber mill for 42 years before retiring, and Mom spent most of her career as a high school secretary. They raised me to be independent and self-sufficient, but they also taught me that family takes care of family. When Mom had her hip replacement surgery last September, I knew things were going to change. She was 67, still sharp as a tack, but her mobility was going to be limited for months. Dad at 69 was healthy but stubborn as hell. He had this old-school mentality that asking for help was admitting weakness, especially when it came to taking care of his wife. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment and work remotely most days. My job pays well, especially for someone without kids or a mortgage. So when I started researching how to help my parents, money wasn't really the issue. The issue was distance. 3 hours might not sound like much, but when you're worried about your mom falling in the shower or your dad forgetting to turn off the gas burner, it might as well be 3,000 miles. That's when I discovered smart home technology designed specifically for seniors. Motion sensors that could detect falls, smart doorbells with cameras so they could see visitors without getting up, automated medication dispensers, gas leak detectors, smart thermostats they could control with voice commands, even a refrigerator that could track food expiration dates and suggest meals. It was perfect. I spent weeks researching the best systems, reading reviews, comparing features. I wanted something comprehensive but not overwhelming. The total cost came to just over $15,000, which was a significant chunk of my savings, but worth every penny if it meant my parents could stay in their home safely. The installation took 2 full days. I told my parents I was coming down for a long weekend visit, but I had secretly arranged for the tech team to meet me there early Saturday morning. I wanted it to be a surprise, a gift that would make their lives easier and give me peace of mind. When my parents got back from their Saturday morning grocery run, I was practically bouncing with excitement. "Welcome to your new smart home," I announced, gesturing around their familiar living room that now featured discrete sensors, a new thermostat display, and a voice assistant hub on the side table. Mom's reaction was everything I had hoped for. Her face lit up as I demonstrated how she could adjust the temperature, turn lights on and off, or call for help without having to get up from her recliner. She was especially excited about the medication reminder system and the grocery list feature that would automatically order things when they ran low. Dad's reaction was, "Well, typical Dad. What's all this junk, Sarah?" He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, frowning at the small devices I'd placed strategically around their home. "It's not junk, Dad. It's safety equipment. Look, this sensor can detect if Mom falls and automatically call for help. This one monitors for gas leaks. The camera lets you see who's at the door before you answer it. We don't need cameras watching our every move. What happens to all this information, huh? Where does it go?" I had expected some resistance, so I was prepared. I spent the next hour explaining privacy settings, showing him how the data was encrypted, demonstrating that most of the processing happened locally on the devices themselves. But I could see him getting more frustrated with every explanation. "I've been taking care of your mother for 43 years, he finally said, his voice getting louder. "I think I can handle it without some computer telling me how to do it." Mom tried to mediate. "Bob, Sarah's just trying to help. These things could be useful, especially while I'm recovering." But Dad had already made up his mind. He spent the rest of my visit making snide comments about Big Brother watching and asking pointed questions about who was really behind all this technology. I left Sunday evening feeling disappointed but not entirely surprised. Dad had always been suspicious of new technology. It took him years to accept having a cell phone, and he still complained about how complicated the TV remote had gotten. I figured he'd come around once he saw how helpful everything was. I was wrong. The problem started small. A week after I got back to Portland, Mom called to say the voice assistant wasn't responding to her commands anymore. "Did you accidentally unplug it?" I asked. "I don't think so, honey. It was working yesterday." I walked her through some basic troubleshooting steps over the phone, but nothing worked. I ended up having to drive down the following weekend to fix it. When I arrived, I found the device had been moved from the side table to a shelf in the closet, unplugged and covered with a dish towel. "Dad, why is this in here?" Thing was making noise all night. Kept Janet awake. The device had a night mode that was supposed to prevent exactly that problem, but when I checked the settings, someone had disabled it. I moved the hub back to the living room, explained the night mode feature again, and made Dad promise to ask me before changing any settings. 2 weeks later, The fall detection sensors in the bathroom stopped working. Mom discovered this when she had a dizzy spell getting out of the shower and realized the system hadn't activated. When I checked the app remotely, I saw that those sensors had been disconnected from the network. Another weekend drive south. Another conversation with Dad about not tampering with the equipment. I didn't tamper with anything, he insisted. Maybe your fancy gadgets just don't work as well as you thought. But I found the sensors stuffed in the bathroom cabinet. Their batteries removed. Dad, you could have removed the batteries by accident when you were cleaning, but you definitely moved these. I move things when I clean, Sarah. Always have. If your equipment can't handle that, maybe it doesn't belong in our house. This was the pattern for the next 6 weeks. Every time I'd get a notification that a device had gone offline or Mom would mention that something wasn't working, I'd drive down to discover that Dad had moved, hidden, unplugged, or otherwise disabled whatever was supposed to be helping them. The smart doorbell camera got accidentally sprayed with the garden hose. The motion sensors for the nighttime hallway lighting were found taped over with electrical tape because Dad claimed they were too bright. The smart thermostat was reset to manual mode and the Wi-Fi connection disabled. Each time, Dad had an excuse. Each time he got more defensive when I confronted him. Each time Mom tried to keep the peace by suggesting maybe the technology was too complicated for people their age. But I wasn't giving up. I'd invested $15,000 and dozens of hours into this system. More importantly, every disabled device meant my parents were less safe. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late November. I was working late at my apartment when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the fire department's non-emergency number. Ms. Martinez, this is Captain Rodriguez with Central Valley Fire. We had a call about a possible gas leak at your parents' address on Maple Street. My stomach dropped. Are they okay? Is anyone hurt? Everyone's fine, but we did find elevated gas levels in the kitchen. Looks like a burner was left on without being lit. Your mother said they have a gas detection system, but it wasn't working. After I hung up with the fire department, I called my parents. Mom answered, sounding shaky. Oh, honey, it was so scary. I could smell something funny in the kitchen, but I wasn't sure what it was. Your father was in the garage working on something and I couldn't get up quickly enough to check. Thank goodness Mrs. Patterson from next door smelled it too and called the fire department. Mom, what happened to the gas leak detector? There was a long pause. I don't know, sweetheart. Your father said it kept beeping for no reason, so he might have done something to it. When Dad got on the phone, he was immediately defensive. Those damn sensors were going off every time Janet used the hairspray in the bathroom. False alarms left and right. I'm not living in a house where some computer is screaming at me all day long. Dad, gas leak detectors are supposed to be sensitive. Hairspray contains volatile compounds that can trigger them, but that's better than missing an actual leak. Well, they missed this one anyway, didn't they? Because you disabled them. I didn't disable anything. I just moved some stuff around. That's when I knew I had to take action. The next morning, I called my boss and told her I needed to work remotely from my parents' town for the rest of the week. I arrived Wednesday evening with a plan. I was going to sit Dad down and have a serious conversation about how his interference was putting both of them in danger. I was prepared to show him documentation about the safety features, testimonials from other families, even offer to have a technician come out and customize the settings to his preferences. What I found when I got there was worse than I expected. The smart home system was essentially destroyed. Not just unplugged or moved, but actually damaged. The main hub had been taken apart with a screwdriver. The motion sensors had been pried off the walls, leaving holes in the paint. The smart smoke detectors had been replaced with old-fashioned battery-operated ones. Even the smart light switches had been swapped back to regular switches. Dad, what the hell happened here? He was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, wearing that stubborn expression I knew so well. I fixed the problems you created. Fix them? Dad, you destroyed $15,000 worth of safety equipment. Safety equipment? That stuff was spying on us, Sarah. Recording our conversations, watching our every move, sending information God knows where. We went over this already. The privacy settings were configured to prevent, you don't get it, do you? His voice was getting louder, angrier than I'd ever heard him. You come in here with your fancy college degree and your computer job, and you think you know better than me how to take care of my own family. Well, I've got news for you. I was keeping this family safe before you were even born, and I'll be keeping us safe long after you get bored and move on to the next shiny thing. That hurt. It hurt more than I expected. I'm not trying to replace you, Dad. I'm trying to help. I live 3 hours away and I worry about you guys. Well, stop worrying. We don't need your help. What about the gas leak? What if Mom had been hurt? The gas leak wouldn't have happened if your fancy sensors hadn't been screaming bloody murder every time we used the bathroom. I turned off the wrong burner because I was distracted trying to figure out why your gadgets were malfunctioning. Mom had been quiet through this whole exchange, but now she spoke up from her chair in the living room. Bob, honey, maybe we could find a compromise. Sarah's just worried about us. But Dad wasn't listening to reason. There's no compromise with surveillance, Janet. Either we have privacy in our own home, or we don't. I spent the rest of that evening trying to salvage what I could of the smart home system, but most of it was beyond repair. Dad had been thorough in his destruction. The few devices that were still functional, he'd hidden so well that it took me hours to find them. As I was getting ready for bed in my childhood bedroom, I started thinking about Dad's behavior over the past few months. It wasn't just the technology resistance, though. That was the most obvious issue. There were other things, too. He'd always been a creature of habit, but lately his routines had become almost obsessive. He checked the door locks multiple times each night, something I'd noticed during my previous visits but hadn't thought much about. He'd started writing everything down on paper instead of trusting his memory for simple things like grocery lists or appointment times. The paranoia about the smart home devices was extreme, even for someone who was generally suspicious of technology. And the way he'd destroyed everything was so methodical, so thorough, that it suggested he'd been planning it for weeks. Thursday morning, while Dad was in the garage and Mom was napping, I called Dr. Peterson, their family doctor. I'd known him since I was a kid, and I was hoping he might have some insight into Dad's behavior. "I can't discuss your father's medical information with you without his permission," Dr. Peterson said. "But I can tell you that what you're describing could be symptoms of several different conditions." "Has he seemed confused about time or place? Has he had trouble recognizing familiar people or places?" "Not exactly, but he does seem more suspicious than usual, and he's been having trouble remembering things he used to know, like how to program the TV or set the thermostat." Those could be early signs of cognitive decline. The paranoia, the difficulty with new technology, the insistence on routines, they're all consistent with early-stage dementia. The word hit me like a punch to the stomach. Dementia. What should I do? Encourage him to come in for a complete evaluation. There are tests we can run, and if it is early-stage dementia, there are medications that can slow the progression. He'll never agree to that. He barely trusts doctors for regular checkups. Then you might need to involve other family members, or wait for a situation where he doesn't have a choice. After I hung up, I sat in Mom and Dad's quiet kitchen and tried to process what I was learning. If Dad had early-stage dementia, it would explain so much. The technology paranoia wasn't just stubbornness, it was confusion and fear. He wasn't remembering that I'd installed the smart home devices, so when he encountered them, he genuinely believed strangers had broken in to plant surveillance equipment. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The obsessive checking of door locks, the detailed lists written on paper, the anger when I tried to explain how the devices worked, because he couldn't retain the information long enough to understand it. But I needed to be sure before I confronted him or talked to Mom about it. Thursday afternoon, while Dad was taking his usual nap, I had a careful conversation with Mom. "Has Dad seemed different to you lately? More forgetful or suspicious than usual?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, and I could see she was choosing her words carefully. "Well, he has been having trouble with some things. Last week, he couldn't remember how to get to the hardware store, even though he's been going there for 20 years. And he's been asking me the same questions multiple times, like what day of the week it is or whether we've paid certain bills. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to worry you, honey. And I thought maybe it was just stress from my surgery and everything. Getting older is hard for him. He's always prided himself on being strong and capable. Mom, I think there might be something medical going on. Dr. Peterson said Dad should come in for some tests." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I've been wondering the same thing. But you know how your father feels about doctors. He'll never agree to it voluntarily." That's when I had an idea. I spent Thursday evening researching home healthcare services that offered cognitive assessments. I found a company that specialized in evaluating seniors in their own homes, using techniques that felt more like casual conversation than medical testing. Friday morning, I called the service and explained the situation. They agreed to send someone out the following week, but they warned me that without Dad's cooperation, the assessment would be limited. However, the coordinator told me, "We can provide you with some strategies for managing his anxiety about technology and creating a safer environment that doesn't trigger his paranoia." That gave me another idea. Instead of trying to rebuild the smart home system with, obviously, high-tech devices, what if I could create the same safety features using technology that looked familiar and non-threatening? I spent Friday afternoon driving around town, visiting antique stores, thrift shops, and estate sales. I was looking for items that could be modified to house modern safety technology, things that would blend in with my parents' existing decor. I found an old-fashioned wooden mantel clock with a large face and internal space for electronics, a vintage radio console that could house motion sensors and a communication hub, picture frames in styles my parents already had throughout their house, even an old rotary phone that could be converted into an emergency communication device. My plan was to retrofit these familiar objects with hidden safety technology. Dad would see things that looked normal and comfortable, but the actual protective functions would still be there. Saturday morning, I presented my idea to both parents. "I've been thinking about what you said, Dad, about the smart home stuff being too intrusive. What if we tried a different approach? I showed them the vintage items I'd bought and explained how they could be modified. The clock would still tell time, but it would also monitor air quality and temperature. The radio would still play music, but it would have a panic button and fall detection sensors built in. Everything would look normal, but you'd still have the safety features. Dad examined the clock suspiciously, but I could see he was less hostile than before. How do I know you're not just hiding the same spying equipment inside these things? Because I'll modify them myself right here where you can watch. You can see exactly what goes inside each item and how it works. To my surprise, he agreed. I spent the weekend working at their kitchen table, carefully installing miniaturized sensors and communication devices inside the vintage housings. Dad watched everything I did, asking questions and occasionally offering suggestions based on his experience with electronics from his factory days. The process seemed to calm his anxiety. When he could see exactly what each component did and how it connected to the others, the technology became less threatening. The vintage radio console became our main hub, with its original AM/FM tuner still functional but now also housing motion sensors, a two-way communication system, and air quality monitors. The mantel clock gained a discrete fall detection system and temperature monitoring. The picture frames contained sensors for doors and windows, disguised as normal hanging hardware. By Sunday evening, we had a working safety system that looked like a collection of family heirlooms rather than surveillance equipment. But I still hadn't addressed the underlying issue of Dad's cognitive changes. That opportunity came Monday morning, when the home health assessor arrived as scheduled. I told my parents she was the insurance representative who needed to evaluate their home for their supplemental health policy. Margaret Sims was a registered nurse in her 50s with a warm, grandmotherly manner that immediately put both my parents at ease. Instead of conducting formal tests, she engaged them in casual conversation while observing their responses and interactions. She asked Dad about his work at the lumber mill, his hobbies, his daily routines. She complimented Mom on her home decorating and asked about family photos. To my parents, it seemed like a pleasant social visit, but Margaret was carefully evaluating Dad's memory, language skills, problem-solving abilities, and emotional responses. After she left, I walked her to her car. "Your father shows several early indicators of mild cognitive impairment," she told me quietly. "His short-term memory is definitely affected, and there are signs of executive function decline. The paranoia and technology resistance are classic symptoms. How serious is it?" "It's still early stage, which means there are treatment options that could slow the progression. But he needs a proper medical evaluation as soon as possible. He won't go voluntarily. Then you'll need to create a situation where he doesn't have a choice. Is there another family member who might have influence with him?" I thought about Dad's older brother, Uncle Frank, who lived about an hour away. Frank was the only person Dad really looked up to, partly because Frank was a veteran, and partly because he was 5 years older and had always been the family patriarch. That evening, I called Uncle Frank and explained the situation. "I was wondering about that myself," Frank said. "Last time we talked, Bob seemed confused about some things. Asked me the same question 3 different times during one phone call. Would you be willing to help me get him to see a doctor? Leave it to me, kiddo. Your dad's always been stubborn, but he's not stupid. If I frame it right, I can get him to agree." Uncle Frank's approach was brilliant. Instead of talking about memory problems or dementia, he focused on staying sharp to take care of Janet. "Bob," he said during his visit the following weekend, "you and I aren't getting any younger. I've been thinking we should both get those memory and concentration tests just to make sure we're staying on top of our game. Our wives are depending on us." By presenting it as something they do together and framing it as maintaining their ability to be good husbands, Frank eliminated the shame and fear that had been preventing Dad from seeking help. 2 weeks later, both brothers went in for comprehensive cognitive evaluations. Dad's results confirmed what we already suspected. He had mild cognitive impairment, likely the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. The good news was that it was caught early, and there were medications that could help slow the progression. Dr. Peterson explained the diagnosis to all of us together, emphasizing that Dad was still capable of living independently. "With some support systems in place, the technology anxiety you've been experiencing is very common with this condition," he told Dad. "New or unfamiliar devices can trigger confusion and fear. But the safety modifications Sarah has made using familiar objects, that's exactly the right approach." Dad was quiet for a long time after getting the diagnosis. Finally, he looked at me. "I'm sorry I destroyed your equipment, sweetheart. I wasn't thinking clearly." "It's okay, Dad. I understand now." "No, it's not okay. You spent a lot of money trying to help us, and I acted like you were the enemy." Over the following months, we developed a routine that worked for everyone. The disguised safety system functioned perfectly, monitoring my parents without triggering Dad's anxiety. His medication helped stabilize his cognitive decline, and knowing about his condition helped all of us adjust our expectations and communication styles. I started visiting every other weekend instead of waiting for emergencies. Mom and I developed a system where she could text me simple updates about Dad's state of mind and any concerning incidents. Uncle Frank made it a point to check in regularly, maintaining the supportive dynamic he'd established. Most importantly, Dad and I rebuilt our relationship. Understanding that his resistance hadn't been personal or malicious made it easier for me to be patient with his limitations. And his gradual acceptance of help, once his pride was protected by the familiar appearance of the safety equipment, allowed him to feel like he was still in control of his home. The vintage radio console became his favorite piece of equipment. He enjoyed tuning in to the old stations he'd always listened to, and the fall detection sensors gave him confidence to move around the house more freely. The disguised monitoring system meant I could check on them remotely without him feeling surveilled. 6 months after the diagnosis, Dad's condition had stabilized on medication. He still had difficult days, but the paranoia about technology was almost completely gone. He'd even started asking me questions about how the hidden sensors worked, showing the curiosity about electronics that had always been part of his personality. "You know," he told me during one of my visits, "this old radio setup is pretty clever. I can't even tell where all the gadgets are hidden." "That was the point, Dad. I should have trusted you from the beginning. You always were the smart one in the family." Looking back, I learned several important lessons from this experience. First, when someone's behavior changes dramatically, especially involving increased paranoia or resistance to help, there might be an underlying medical cause that needs to be addressed with compassion rather than confrontation. Second, the most advanced technology isn't always the best solution. Sometimes the most effective approach is the one that makes people feel comfortable and maintains their dignity. Finally, family caregiving requires patience, creativity, and willingness to see problems from multiple perspectives. What looked like stubborn defiance was actually fear and confusion from a man who was losing control of his cognitive abilities. Today, my parents are still living safely in their own home. Dad's condition has progressed slowly, thanks to early intervention and medication. The disguised safety system continues to provide both protection and peace of mind without triggering his anxiety. Mom has become more comfortable with technology and even learned to use some of the voice features for managing their daily routines. I've also started working with other families who are dealing with similar situations. There's a real need for home safety technology that doesn't look or feel intimidating to older adults, especially those with cognitive decline. The $15,000 I originally spent wasn't wasted after all. It just took a more creative approach to implementation. More importantly, the experience brought my family closer together and taught us all better ways to support each other through difficult transitions. Dad still checks the door locks multiple times each night, but now I understand that routine gives him comfort and security. The vintage radio still plays his favorite oldies stations, but it also lets me know he's safe and active. And every time I visit, he shows me some small modification or improvement he's made to our system. "You know, Sarah," he told me recently, "this whole setup reminds me of the electronics projects we used to work on when you were little. Remember how we'd build those crystal radios together?" I did remember. And I realized that the best solution hadn't been about imposing modern technology on my parents' lives. It had been about finding a way to blend new capabilities with familiar experiences, creating something that felt like home, while providing the safety we all needed. That's a lesson worth $15,000 any day.